right. Great. So join us in Ezekiel chapter 27 tonight. And Lord willing, we'll be looking at Ezekiel 27 and 28. And in a way, this is the second half of a look at the judgment on the nation state of Tyre. Tyre and Sidon, twin cities in modern-day Lebanon. That's what we're going to be looking at here tonight. So let's remember where we're at in the book of Ezekiel, because it opened up with God calling Ezekiel to a mission in the first 3 chapters. And then we took an extended period of 21 chapters, and we looked through the messages that Ezekiel was told to bring to Judah. Judah that was there with him in Babylon, but also Judah that was still back in Jerusalem, because there was more judgment to come against the city of Jerusalem and the surrounding areas. They were going to be yet taken over and conquered. So Israel has a lot to be told to them yet through Ezekiel, and we got a lot of that in chapters 4 through 24. Well, we began the last time we were together this third section of the book, in which Ezekiel is now prophesying to the nations, certain nations, foreign nations. Well, which nations? Well, it's the ones that affected Israel. It's the ones that had interactions with Israel, the ones that had he's told to talk to and talk with. When we were in chapter 25, the last time we were together, he actually spoke to 4 different nations: Ammon, Moab, Edom, and the Philistines. And then we looked at chapter 26, and it was a bit of a message directly at Tyre. So all the nations that are directly surrounding Israel back in those days and even today, just with their modern names. And so just don't forget through this here third at these nations why it's important to understand why God says woe to these foreign nations. And we put together a little outline to remember it's important to think about these messages to four. We're looking today at these cities of Tyre and Sidon, which is in the north of Israel. Today, these cities are in the nation of Lebanon. Lots of strife and turmoil still to this day in these areas. But Tyre specifically is the epitome of pride. If you were going to identify different sins by different nations, maybe you'd say that Babylon was idolatry, but you would say Tyre represents the sin of pride. And all sins ultimately can go back to pride, of self-exaltation. And so, although we looked at Tyre in chapter 26 the last time we were together, tonight's messages in chapter 27 and 28 actually continue to go deeper into this judgment, this message against the nation of Tyre. In fact, it goes so deep that you're going to see that at one point it completely switches, and the Lord is no longer talking through Ezekiel about Tyre the nation, but about the kingdom of hell. He's no longer talking to the ruler of Tyre. He's now talking to the spiritual ruler of Tyre, Satan himself. Chapter 28, you'll see tonight, is all about Satan himself, the ruler of this world, and his pride. And so, altogether tonight, focused on something of the earth because you're humanly good at it, rather than focusing on what the Lord wants you to do. You know, sometimes the Lord doesn't always call you to do something that you're really, really good at. Ask Moses. Right? When Moses was called to lead the children of Israel, he's like, but I got this stutter, I can't talk. He's like, I'll help you through this. You know, the Lord doesn't always call us to something that we're wonderful at, but he wants to use us for important things. Well, pride would do the opposite. It would just make you focus on being better and better at some earthly thing. And one day you wake up and you realize that you have the, greatest ping pong ball collection in the world, and nobody cares because your pride was invested in some hobby that doesn't matter. And so let's begin here in chapter 27, verse 1. And it says, "Moreover, the word of Yahweh came to me, saying, Now as for you, son of man, take up a lamentation," or that's a mourning cry, "take up a lamentation over Tyre, and say to Tyre, who inhabits the entrance of the sea," he'll go on and talk about them as a trader of the peoples of the coastland. So he's going to give them the message starting here at the end of verse 3. But first of all, he addresses the city of Tyre. Well, Tyre was, we mentioned this last time in chapter 26, Tyre was the interchange of all the oceanic nations. Any of the nations around the Mediterranean and beyond, even up to Britannica, which is modern-day England, right? All of these nations would flow into Tyre. This was the international trade hub of the waters. Tyre lived and died based on being a merchant and being a trader. Trader, 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 not like against their own country, but as in exchange. So this whole chapter here is a bit of a mourning cry from the perspective of Tyre becoming a shipwreck. That's the imagery that God gives in this chapter. It's very fitting for a nation like Tyre. We mentioned last time in chapter 26 that if Babylon was known as having the mother of all armies, well, Tyre was known as having the mother of all navies. They had this shipping industry that was second to none and traveled the world through it. So that's who this message is going to go to. And so we begin the Lord's message here at the end of verse 3, and this is what he says to them. Thus saith Lord Yahweh, O Tyre, you have said, I am perfect in beauty. Your borders are in the heart of the seas. Your builders have perfected your beauty. They have made all your planks of fir trees from Shinar. They have taken a cedar from Lebanon to make a mast for you, like a mast of a ship, right? In verse 6, of oaks from Bashan, they have made your oars with ivory. They have inlaid your decks of boxwood from the coasts of Cyprus, which is also known as Chittim. Verse 7, your sail was of fine embroidered linen from Egypt, so that it became your standard, or that's your banner, your sign, right? Your awning was blue and purple from the coastlands of Elisha. This is describing Tyre as if it's this beautiful ship, right? You get the idea? Let's just continue here in verse 8. The inhabitants of Sidon and Arvad were your rowers. Your wise men, O Tyre, were aboard. They were your pilots. In other words, your navigators, right? Verse 9. The elders of Gebal and her wise men were with you, repairing the seams. All the ships of the sea and their sailors were with you in order to deal with all your merchandise. Just two more verses. Verse 10. Persia and Lud and Put. So everywhere, Persia we know is Iran, right? That's pretty far into the east from where they're at. Lud and Put, this is like Libya down in Egypt, so pretty far away nations. So Persia, Lud, and Put were in your military force, your men of war. They hung shield and helmet in you. They set forth your majesty. And finally in verse 11, the sons of Arvad and your military force were on your walls all around. And the Gemadim were in your towers. They hung their small shields on your walls all around. They perfected your beauty. So here, first of all, it begins with the sin of Tyre. Do you see it already? He's describing this city as a beautiful ship in analogy. That's how he's describing them. Do you see yet the sin that's being laid out here? Well, it's their claim, but going the whole way back to the beginning of this in verse 3, their claim that, O Tyre, you have said, I am perfect in beauty. And then he goes on to talk about them as they would describe themselves in all of their majesty, right? That is the beginning of their problem. Look at me, I am perfect. I have it all. I have everything I need. So God describing Tyre as this ship. In fact, we could break these verses that we just read down kind of into three sections. I wonder if you saw it as we were going through. Verse 4 through 7 actually describes the ship itself, right? It's describing in those verses, the planks of the ship are wonderful. The mast of the ship is wonderful. The standard banner sign is just this beautiful signage. So it's describing the ship itself. And then we got down to verse 8 and 9. And verse 8 and 9 was describing all of the men of work, all of the people that made this happen. and the wise men that put all this together. And then finally in verse 10 and 11, it describes the men of war and the military forces that would go out on these ships as well. And so it's describing the city as this ship and how beautiful it was with all of the wise men putting it all together. They had the men of work, they had the men of war, they had everything. They had it all. And that's the description that's given to us here. And some people look at this and you say, well, what's wrong with that? They're just striving to do a good work. Well, we already got a hint of where this is going because of verse 3. They look at themselves and they say, I am perfect in beauty. You know what this is like? This is a lot like when David was the king of Israel. And when David finally got a chance to rest, you know what he did? He numbered the people. He took a census of the people because he wanted to know how strong he was and how awesome his military was and how great his nation was. And God said, you don't need to do that. Can I not win by many or by few? What does it matter how many you have? And yet David in his pride wanted to number the people to know how great he was. You see these? Do you still see churches take attendance numbers and all that? You see some of them still post it up on the boards, right? They have the little boards off to the side, or maybe it's in their bulletin now. That's the Lord's work on how those things happen. That's not for us. And cannot the Lord change Chambersburg with a few? He doesn't need thousands to change Chambersburg. He could do it with 10 if he wanted to. That's his business. And so this is the beginning of their problem. Look how great we are. Well, let's go on now and continue to see the Lord's problem with them. We're going to read another large section here. Excuse me. Starting in verse 12, he's now going to start talking about all of these countries around that interchanged with them. And so we're going to get many, many nation names here. Starting in verse 12, Tarshish, which is modern Spain. Tarshish was your customer because of the abundance of all kinds of wealth. With silver and iron and tin and lead, they paid for your wares. Javan, Tubal, and Meshech, these are all parts of modern Turkey. They were your traders. With the lives of men and vessels of bronze, they paid for your merchandise. So there we even have forced slavery still, right? Verse 14, those from Beth Togarmah gave horses and war horses and mules for your wares. And then in verse 15, the sons of Dedan, that's a part of modern Saudi Arabia. The sons of Dedan were your traders. Many coastlands were customers at your hand. Ivory tusks and ebony they brought as your payment. Aram was your customer because of the abundance of your goods. That's modern Syria. They paid for your wares with emeralds, pearls, embroidered work, fine linen, coral, and ruby. And then right here in the middle of this list, we have verse 17. Judah and the land of Israel, they were your traders. With the wheat of Minnith, cakes, honey, oil, and balm, they paid for your merchandise. Damascus was your customer, again, a part of Syria. Because of the abundance of your goods, because of the abundance of all kinds of wealth, because of the wine of Helbon and white wool. Also in verse 19, Dedan and Javan paid for your wares. From Uzal, wrought iron and cassia and sweet cane were among your merchandise. Dedan traded with you in saddle clothes for riding. Arabia and all the princes of Kedar, again parts of Saudi Arabia, they were customers at your hand for lambs and rams and goats. For these, they were your customers. And then verse 22, the traders of Sheba and Ramah, again, these are parts of Arabia, they traded with you. They paid for your wares with the best of all kinds of spices and with all kinds of precious stones and gold. And then look at all these other nations here listed in verse 23. We won't go through all of these, but Haran and Cana, Eden, the traders of Sheba, Asher, and Chilmad traded with you. They traded with you in choice garments, in clothes of blue and embroidered work, and in carpets of many colors, and tightly wound cords, which were among your merchandise. Wow, this list. I mean, not only is it a list of all of these foreign nations that traded with them, but it's also the idea is that all of the precious commodities from all over the world and all of these different areas came through this port. Everything. You know, we talk about the Silk Road in China, and you read this in your textbooks in school and stuff, and how we brought product out of the east to the west. Tyre was that of the ancient world. They were the hub where all of the different unique merchandise from all over the world came through this port city of Tyre. It wasn't like that all along the Mediterranean. I think sometimes we have this impression that, well, if you have a coastline, well, you could have a port city anywhere. It really wasn't like that. I mean, Israel had a port city in Joppa, and then you've got this one here in the north at Tyre. You had another one down in Alexandria, Egypt, and that's about it. On this edge of the Mediterranean, that was the only real coastal port cities, and Tyre was the hub. All of these nations, dozens of countries and dozens of goods listed here as if it's a ship's manifest. Well, why would the Lord take this time to just detail out every part of this? He's making the point that they have reached the pinnacle. They arrived. If they were striving to be the trader of the world, guess what? It worked. It worked. And you know, some people get to this point where they arrive. They succeed at the thing they set out to in life. And they say one of three things. You could be like Alexander the Great, and you could say, I've conquered the world, and then die in a drunken stupor in Babylon because you're depressed, that there's nothing left to do. That's one answer. That's one thing people do when they arrive at the pinnacle of success. You could be like Tyre, where you arrive at all of this success and you say, let's just keep going. Let's just keep going. There's got to be more. And we'll find there's judgment for them. But there's a third option. There's a really good example in your Bible about a third option. The fisherman Peter. The fisherman Peter, his life's... You know, in those days, you know, if you were a fisherman, you know why you were a fisherman? Do you know why? Because your dad was a fisherman, and his dad was a fisherman. You didn't change occupations. This is what you were. You continued in the family business. That was almost always the case. So he would have watched his dad, his grandfather, his uncles, and others being a fisherman. And finally one day Jesus comes along. And have you caught anything? No, nothing. Try your net on this side, right? Come on, we know what we're doing. We've been out here. We're the professional fishermen. My dad was a fisherman. His dad was a fisherman. See, my uncles are still out there. I'm making that part up. You get the point, okay? And he's like, all right, but at your will, I'll do it. And he catches this enormous catch of fish that he could have never caught on his own, as if the Lord brought him to the pinnacle of success and the greatest catch he could have ever caught. And what's Peter's response? Do you remember in that passage? Do you remember what his response was? He comes immediately after bringing in the fish to the Lord's feet, and he says, depart from me, I am a sinful man. He realized that he's been brought to the height of success of all that his earthly fanfare was all about, and it wasn't fulfilling. It was empty. And he realized the Lord was really what he needed. And that is exactly where we should come to when we get to this point where Tyre is. We should say, this is empty. This is not what I thought it was. There's got to be more, Lord. And if you do that, you'll find what Peter found, and you'll come to the Lord. So here in their height of success, now we continue in verse 25, and we're going to see what the Lord does here, starting in verse 25. The ships of Tarshish were the carriers for your merchandise, and you were filled and were very glorious in the heart of the seas. Your rowers have brought you into great waters. The east wind has broken you on the heart of the seas. Your wealth, your wares, your merchandise, your sailors, your pilots, all these things that we've been talking about and describing as wonderful. Your repairers of seams, your dealers of merchandise, and all your men of war who are in you, with all your assembly that is in your midst, will fall into the heart of the seas on the day of your downfall. At the sound of the cry of your pilots, the pasture lands shall shake. So Tyre here pictured as the greatest of traders, doing the greatest of mission, with the greatest of merchandise, in the greatest of ships, on the greatest of water, the greatest possible reward, and they're pictured as sinking. They're sinking, and it just comes to an end. Everything was great until it wasn't. And all of a sudden, you realize one time that there are so many things that are out of our control, that are above our control, that are beyond our means, like the waves of the ocean. And just about the time you think, I have conquered this place, a wave sweeps in and takes you out. We think we're so great until all of a sudden there's a realization that we're not. So many people that have experienced traumatic trauma in life, and that's what it took to humble them, to bring them down from a place of, I have everything. Wait till we get to the book of Daniel coming up soon. In the midst of the book of Daniel, we're going to see Nebuchadnezzar humbled, and he actually responds to the Lord because of it. And Tyre here will not have any longer a chance to respond. So, I just think of it this way, like the most skilled of parachutists can still die on the next try, right? Yeah, I've got a handle on this gravity thing until you don't. The smartest of pilots can still die on the next flight, even if they think they got their hand on. The strongest of swimmers can still die on the next swim. We think we have such a control on this universe until God just says, "Phew, not this time, not this time. You thought you were so great," until it's over. We just seem to have the control over the awesome power of God's creation until we don't. Until God says, well, let me show you what it can really do. What a reminder that every moment of life just depends on God to sustain us, right? I mean, don't let that scare you by hearing these things. Let it say to you, I need God's favor. I want God's favor. I could go out tonight and have a bolt of lightning strike me. I have no idea, right? I need God's favor. We don't need this world's wealth. We don't need to conquer this world's affairs. We need God's favor in the affairs of this world. That's what we need, especially when we think we're getting to that place where we've mastered something. That's the moment that we actually need to realize, I need the Lord. I need the Lord's favor. Sometimes we even do that financially, right? We strive to get to that place where we can financially afford life, just in general. And we finally get there, and then we're like, I've arrived. I can do this, right? And maybe we're holding back from doing for the Lord what we know we're supposed to do for the Lord. And then all of a sudden, the Lord is like, oh, you think you got a handle on it? Well, take this bill and that bill and this bill. And what we really need is God's favor with our money, knowing that we're using our money for what God wants us to use it for. Then His blessing will be in it. This world just seems like it's in our control until it's not. And God could change that at any time, in any moment. And that's what happened to Tyre. Verse 29. Excuse me. Verse 29, all who handle the oar, the sailors, and all the pilots of the sea will come down from their ships. They will stand on the land, and they will make their voice heard over you and will cry bitterly. They will cast dust on their heads. This is signs of mourning, right? They will wallow in ashes, and they will make themselves bald for you and gird themselves with sackcloth. They will weep for you in bitterness of soul. They will weep bitterly. Moreover, in verse 32, in their wailing, they will take up a lamentation for you and lament over you and say, who is like Tyre, like her who is silent in the midst of the sea? When your waves went out from the seas, you satisfied a great number of people. With the greatness of your wealth and your merchandise, you enriched the kings of the earth. And so we have all of these nations, a great number of people that were made happy and were satisfied in the flesh at what Tyre had done for them. So that's why they're so upset, because Tyre helped them so much in the flesh. This world mourns for those that will help them, have another bite to eat or have another funny movie to watch. This world will mourn for you. Why is it that every time a celebrity dies, you're going to see that on the news? But every time a Mother Teresa of the world dies, you don't necessarily see that on the news. Right? Because they enrich this world in the flesh. See, our call as Christians is different than that. Our call is, we have a different commodity that we exchange as Christians, right? We exchange the commodity of God's love in exchange for nothing back. That's what we're here to exchange. That's the commodity. Our call is to make people rejoice and be refreshed in spirit. That's what we're here for. We're not here to just refresh them and rejoice them in the flesh only. In fact, turn to John. I don't know how to do this, but turn to John chapter 4 with me if you can. In the New Testament, the Gospel of John, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, chapter 4. I want to look at something here. This is actually a picture of Christ coming to the Samaritan woman. Not just a picture. This is the event when that happened. Christ coming to the Samaritan woman at the well. I want to read a little bit of this. This story is so good at reminding us that the commodity that we have is not something of the flesh that will get us on the news when we die. That we offer a different commodity. John chapter 4, starting verse 7. The woman of Samaria came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Give to me a drink." For his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. Isn't that interesting? That the disciples are worried about the food, and Jesus is worried about something spiritual. Verse 9, therefore the Samaritan woman asked of him, "How do you, being a Jew, ask for a drink from me, being a Samaritan woman? For the Jews have no dealings with the Samaritans." And Jesus answered and said to her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is who says to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given to you living water." She said to him, "Sir, you don't have anything to draw with, and the well is deep. Where then do you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us this well and drank of it himself and his sons and his cattle?" And Jesus answered and said to her, "Everyone who drinks of this water will thirst again, but whoever drinks of the water that I will give to him will never thirst again. But the water that I will give to him will become in him a well of water springing up to eternal life." Don't ever forget that. Would you just remember that, church? That is what's so different about what we're offering. Every other club, every other business in town, every other gathering in town is doing something of a temporary earthly exchange. I'm going to give you this, and you're going to give me this. I'm going to give you an item, you're going to give me an item. I'm going to give you money, and you're going to give me entertainment. All of these exchanges are an earthly exchange that is temporary. We're the only organization in Chambersburg and in the surrounding areas that says, "I want to give you something that will last forever." Wow. That's our commodity. That's what we're trading. That's what makes us so different than Tyre, than all of these nations. And that's what Christ came to get the point across. We have a commodity to offer that is forever, and it's different than every other organization is offering. And yet everybody always thinks of the earthly, right? She's like, "Where's this water? What are you talking about? You don't even have a pitcher to draw from." Doesn't it remind you of the previous chapter in John chapter 3 when Nicodemus came to Jesus at night? And it's like that television channel, Nick at Night. And so anyway, Nicodemus came to Jesus at night, and Jesus is talking about being born again. And he's like, "I'm not going to get inside my mother again. What are you talking about?" Our mind just automatically goes to the earthly. And Christ is always like, "You got to go bigger than that. You got to go bigger than that. You got to think deeper. You got to go expand your mind a little bit." And yet, so go back here now to Ezekiel. Bring it on back. And yet, this is all our human flesh ever wants to think about, is the earthly, the temporary, the food, the entertainment, the things that are going to go away so quickly. Most people will mourn for a philanthropist, but very few will mourn at the death of a preacher. And that is the world we live in, right? But we know the value of what we're offering. Well, let's finish this chapter here, verse 34. Back in Ezekiel 27, verse 34. Now that you are broken by the seas in the depths of the waters, your merchandise and all your assembly have fallen in the midst of you. All the inhabitants of the coastlands are appalled at you, and their kings are horribly horrified. They are troubled in countenance. The merchants among the people hiss at you. You have become terrified, and you will cease to be forever. The whole world is astonished, but basically they're astonished because of how great a fall Tyre has experienced. They're not astonished because, they, as if Tyre was something that they loved. They're not astonished as if Tyre is something irreplaceable. They're astonished because they can't believe how great a fall it was. And yet to the Lord it should be no surprise. It isn't, and to us it should be no surprise. Any amount of gain in this world is nothing compared to gaining eternity. This chapter really, in this example of Tyre, is really a prototype of what we see when we get to the book of Revelation. We get to chapters 17 and 18, and we're looking at the economic environment of the last days. In Revelation 18, it's epitomized by the nation of Babylon. And this idea of Tyre is exactly what we see reviving its ugliness during the 7-year tribulation in the form of Babylon. And we see that in Revelation chapter 18. So the idea is that this drive of commercialism and this drive towards luxury, it doesn't end. This world will continue to pursue that right up until Christ comes back, and they will not give up on that pursuit. They will continue until it is gone. So let's just sum up the city of Tyre this way. It really all goes back to verse 3. The very first thing the Lord said to Tyre in verse 3, that they placed their trust in their beauty. That's what this is all about. They were placing their trust in how wonderful they were. We have it all together. And there is their downfall because of it. And is that not a challenge to you and I? Where are we placing our trust? Is it within ourselves? I am attaining. Look at me. I have attained. Or I am attaining. The flesh will tell you that lie until the day you die. That if you just keep going, you can attain. You can get it. You can be beautiful. Right? Every young girl needs to hear that message, that the world will constantly tell you, you can be more beautiful. You can do it. You're beautiful the way you are. Stop, all right? Leave good enough alone. That pursuit is endless and will never satisfy, but the Lord will satisfy you. So place our trust in eternal things and stop worrying about being perfect in beauty in this world. Well, chapter 28, we're going to break into two halves as we close out tonight. The first half of chapter 28, we're going to present this way. We're talking about pride. We're talking in chapter 27 about how pride makes you focus on what you're good at instead of what matters. Well, we open chapter 28. It's still talking about the nation of Tyre, but not just the nation. The first half of chapter 28 is going to now talk about the ruler of Tyre. In fact, in most translations, it calls him the prince of Tyre. In some translations, it uses the word king, but it's really better translated the prince of Tyre. And so the first half of chapter 28 here, we're going to say that this represents pride makes you think you're more than you are. Okay? So it'll make you pursue the wrong things, and we just saw that. And now it's going to make you think that you yourself are more than you actually are. And this is epitomized in the ruler of Tyre. Let's take a look at this in chapter 28, verse 1. The word of Yahweh came to me, saying, Son of man, say to the ruler of Tyre, Thus saith Lord Yahweh, because your heart is lofty. There it is again. This pride of Tyre represented in its ruler and in its prince. Because your heart is lofty, and you have said, I am a god. I sit enthroned in the seat of gods, in the heart of the seas. Yet you are a man and no God. Although you make your heart like the heart of God, behold, you're wiser than Daniel. There's no secret that is a match for you. Behold, your wisdom and understanding. You have acquired wealth for yourself. You have acquired gold and silver for your treasuries. In verse 5, by your great wisdom, by your trade, you have increased your wealth, and your heart is lofty because of your wealth. And by the way, yes, indeed, this is the biblical Daniel that is mentioned here, and how the prince of Tyre sees himself as wiser than Daniel and wealthier than anyone and the smartest one around kind of thing. Now, we know from the Phoenician annals and also from the writing of Josephus that at this time the king of Tyre was Ithbaal II. That's who was on the throne. But this chapter no doubt goes much deeper than that. In fact, we're going to see that as we get into the second half. Watch for this shift where it's very, very clear that it's no longer talking about the earthly man that was sitting there in some throne. Right now, we certainly are talking about Ithbaal II at this point. So Tyre's prince clearly did achieve great success. There's no denying that. He was smarter, wealthier, and wiser than most or all around him. This is just historical fact, okay? The problem is it went to his head. It made him think that he was more than he was. Great wealth and great success can be a hindrance. Many of us, if you grew up on the side of the tracks that I did, you grow up thinking, if I could just get some more money, then I'll be, what I need. And that's not the case. That is not the case. There are those that have achieved that measure of success, and then they realize that they still don't have contentment. They still don't have the peace and the love and the good relationships that they were seeking for. So great wealth and success can be a hindrance. But there's no denying that this king was wise economically and in many other ways, but he was an absolute fool spiritually. What good is that? If you're the smartest person on this earth for 80 years and then you're gone to hell, what good is it if you're the wisest in this earth, the strongest in this earth for all 80 years? Where is that strength when you die? And so how foolish is this to be one of the greatest in the earth and one of the foolishest spiritually? Foolishest? Is that a word? Can I make that up right now? Is that okay? I'm going to make that up. Okay, thanks. Thank you for your permission. The most foolish, I guess, would be the word. So the fundamental problem here is that of a pride that exceeds all reality. When you begin to have a measure of success with something, you begin to have a distorted view of reality, right? You start to look at everybody as under you. We often judge ourselves by what we can see or, experience locally or experience at the moment, right? Have you ever seen like the high school basketball player that he is the cream of the crop at his high school, right? He is the man at the local high school. And he's all got the plans for college, and he picks a school that's just a little too big to go to college at. And he shows up, and now he's got a new position, left bench, and he never plays a game again. And it can be a humbling experience because we so often judge ourselves just on our local little situation. We think, I'm awesome. What should we be doing? We should be judging ourselves against another standard, God himself. And that will keep us in the right position that we need to be kept in. So we need to learn humility and to stop comparing ourselves to others and just start comparing ourselves to the Lord. And that'll keep us in a rightful position of humility. And then when you find out that the Lord loves you, it's sustainable. And then you can and then you're okay with being humbled before the Lord because you know he loves you. So we continue in verse 6. Therefore, thus saith Lord Yahweh, because you have made your heart like the heart of God, therefore, behold, I will bring strangers upon you, the most ruthless of the nations, and they will draw their swords against the beauty of your wisdom and defile your splendor. They will bring you down to the pit, and you will die the death of those who are slain in the heart of the seas. Will you say then, I am a god? It's like the high school basketball player going to that college that's too big. Will you say you're a star now? Will you say then, I am a god, in the presence of the one who kills you? Though you are a man and not a god, in the hands of those who slay you. Verse 10, you will die the death of the uncircumcised by the hands of strangers, for I have spoken it, declares Lord Yahweh. Now, notice, though, that the condemnation has nothing to do with his wealth. Did you notice that? He's a wealthy man. The condemnation, though, has nothing to do with having money in the bank. That is not a sin. The condemnation has nothing to do with being earthly smart in trade and economy. That is not the condemnation. The condemnation is that of pride, of putting yourself in a higher position than is rightfully yours. And then the question comes, where's your pride in the day that you're conquered? Where's your pride in the day that your position is gone? It's like that, have you seen some videos of like the high-ranking, government official that is pulled over by the cops? And in that environment, the cop has the authority, right? And, the first thing that comes out of their mouth is, oh, don't you know who I am? And the cop's like, I don't care. License and registration, proof of insurance, please. And they're like, you don't know who I am? Don't care. License, registration, proof of insurance. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter any longer. We need to live in light of the unseen reality that we proudly trust in the fact that we walk for God's glory and not for our own. And if we can live for that, that's sustainable. That can't be taken away. I'm living for God's glory. Try taking that away. How do you take that away? But if you live for your own glory, that can be taken away. And so this prince of Tyre, this ruler of Tyre, brought down. There's so many other biblical stories this reminds me of, but just two that popped into my mind right now. You remember the story of King Agrippa in the book of Acts? And he's down at Caesarea Maritime on the coast at his palace. And the people are there giving him praise, and they're like, it's the voice of a God and not a man. And he's listening to this praise, and he's not correcting them. And what happens? God has him eaten up by worms, and he dies because of that. Because he accepted praise as if he was a god and not a man. He accepted it. He let it roll in. Even the angels will not accept that praise, right? You read the book of Revelation and you watch John. He's overwhelmed and he falls down and as if to worship at the feet of an angel or at the feet of one of the elders. And they're like, whoa, get up. I'm just a servant like you. Don't do that. They will not receive worship as if they're God. And Agrippa dies, and here's the king of Tyre being judged in the same way. What did Christ say? Here's the other one that popped into my mind. What did Christ say? He said, when you go into a room, don't even take a more excellent seat. Take the lower seat, because then the only way to move is up. But you take the best seat in the house, the only place to go is down, right? It's just a micro example of what he's talking about. Let's be sure to take our rightful place in this world. Those that are humbled will be exalted, but those that exalt themselves will be humbled. Make no mistake, it happens every time in small examples and here in a great big example. Well, now we have our third and final example of pride. It begins in verse 11 for the rest of the chapter. This now continues as it talks about Tyre to go deeper and deeper into the background of Tyre, into the spiritual behind-the-scenes look at what's happening in Tyre. We've seen the city of Tyre. We've seen the ruler of Tyre, represented with the word ruler or prince. And now, if you just glance your eyes down to verse 12 real quick, and it says we're going to talk now about the what in verse 12? The king of Tyre. This, I believe, along with most other scholars, this is directly talking about the spiritual forces, the ones truly in charge behind the scenes in Tyre, which is Satan himself. This is one of two main passages in the Old Testament that give us deep insight into what happened with Satan in his background, in his becoming who he is. There's more passages in the New Testament that give us great detail, including Revelation chapter 12 or 13. I'm drawing a blank right now, one of those two chapters. But Isaiah 14 and right here in Ezekiel 28 is the other main passages that detail this out. So there is an intentional change here in verse 12, from verse 2 to verse 12, where instead of talking about the prince of Tyre, or it's the word Noged, which is talking about a ruler, to now here in verse 12, it's now talking about the Melech. Melech, that is king, right? So we're talking about Satan beginning here. So let's look at this section. This is easy to understand this section when you think about it this way. Pride will take you farther than you want to go. It will always take you farther than you want to go. And that's what we see here. So verse 11, again the word of Yahweh came to me saying, Son of man, take up a lamentation over the Melech, the king of Tyre, and say to him, Thus saith Lord Yahweh, you had, past tense, the seal of perfection. The idea is you had all of it, or you were the pattern. Okay, sometimes in English we get caught up on this word perfection, and we think, oh, perfection, that only God is perfect. The word is not very good in the English as perfect. The idea is you had the seal of having all of it. You had the seal of being seen as the pattern of what an angel was. That's the idea here. Continuing, you were full of wisdom and complete in beauty, or again, perfect in beauty. It's really better complete in beauty. Beginning of verse 13, you were in Eden, the garden of God. This makes it unavoidable that we are talking about Satan himself. You were in not just Eden, but you were in Eden, the garden of God. There was only 3, or let's say 4 entities in the garden of God: Adam, Eve, God, and Satan. And so this Satan, he was the sum of it all. He was the prototype, the pattern. He was seen as the complete one. He was the pattern of what angels should be. He was complete in wisdom and beauty. I mean, what a combination that is, right? And now let's get some details here about Satan. We'll continue in verse 13. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering: the ruby, the topaz, the diamond, the beryl, the onyx, the jasper. All of them. Yes, indeed, all of these. And the gold and the workmanship of your settings and sockets was in you. On the day that you were created, they were prepared. Verse 14, you were the anointed cherub that covers, and I placed you there. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walked in the midst of the stones of fire. You were blameless in your ways. For your day, from the day you were created until righteousness was found in you. Well, when was Satan created? It says here in the end of verse 13, on the day that you were created. That is the Hebrew word bara, which means created from nothing. This word bara is used in the 6 days of creation. It's not somebody rearranging material to make something new. A tree becomes lumber, becomes a house. No. Bara. This is nothing existed and something came into existence. Satan didn't exist, and then God created him. In fact, it's interesting that not only does it say he was created, but then it said there in verse 14, I placed you there, showing God had authority over him. Right? So when was he created? Well, let's go through that just for a second. When was Satan created? First of all, Genesis chapter 2, at the beginning of Genesis chapter 2, both chapters 1 and 2 detail out the 6 days of creation. The beginning of Genesis chapter 2, verse 1 through 3 says that God made all things in the heavens and the earth, all of it, the visible and the invisible, according to Romans, in 6 literal days, and then he ceased. And at the end of creating all things in the heavens and the earth in 6 literal days, he says in Genesis chapter 1, verse 31, what did he say? It was very good. At the end of each individual day, he said it is good. And at the end of creating it all, he said it is very good. How can God say it was very good if there was corruption or sin or evolution or anything else. How could he say it is very good at the end of it all? He couldn't. He couldn't. So far, our point is that within the 6 days of creation, Satan didn't fall. He's there. He was created within the 6 days of creation, but he hadn't fallen yet. You with me so far? Okay, so he fell after the 6 days of creation. Okay, well, when did Satan fall into corruption? There's actually 4 fallings of Satan. We're talking about his first fall, from beauty and wisdom and being complete in perfection to this fall into corruption. When did that happen? Well, the first time marker that we have in the Old Testament is when Adam's son Seth, it's actually his third son, isn't it? Cain, Abel, Seth. The first time marker we have is when Adam's son Seth was born. It tells us in Genesis chapter 5 that Seth was born 130 years after creation. That's what it tells us. So with Cain and Abel being born before that, that tells us that the fall of man, Adam and Eve eating the apple or whatever it was, this could have happened as late as 128 years into creation. They could have lived in a perfect environment for up to 128 years. Now, I'm along with most other people. I don't think it took nearly that long before they fell into sin. I think it probably happened in a very short period of time, maybe a number of weeks or months. I don't even think it took years. But there was a period of 128 years before before Cain, Abel, and Seth started to come along. So within that 128 years is when Satan himself would have fallen from his completeness into corruption. Does that make sense? We're going to get a little bit deeper into further fallings of Satan here in just a second. In fact, we'll read verse 16 and we'll kind of pick up on that a little bit. So, let me just, because it says that there in verse 15. Just to recap that, it says, you were there in the day that you were created until unrighteousness or iniquity was found in you. So that's what we're talking about, this corruption of Satan. Now, how did that happen? What was it that corrupted him? It's he himself. He himself. You go back and you read the account of Satan from Isaiah. You read Isaiah 14, and you read Satan's pride of saying, I will ascend. I will become like the Most High. I will sit in heaven. That it was of himself that he said, I will be like the Most High. I will replace God. You don't need God, you have me. And so it comes from within him that this corruption and this unrighteousness happened. Now I continue in verse 16. By the abundance of your trade, you were internally filled with violence and you sinned. Therefore, I have cast you as profane from the mountain of God. And I have destroyed you, O covering cherub, from the midst of the stones of fire. Your heart was lofty because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom by reason of your splendor. I cast you to the ground. I put you before kings, that they may see you. Notice his fall is to the ground and before kings. We're going to get back to that. Verse 18. By the abundance of your iniquities, in the unrighteousness of your trade, you profaned your sanctuaries. Therefore, I have brought out fire from the midst of you. It has consumed you. I have turned you to ashes on the earth, in the eyes of all who see you. All who know you among the people are appalled at you. You have become terrified, and you will cease to be forever. So this continues to show further falling of Satan. Satan here is called twice. He's called the anointed cherub that covers. Anointed. What's anointed? Chosen. That's what that means. It means you're I picked you. Okay? Most scholars would say that he was picked to be the head angel. He was the chosen angel of the highest order. That's what a cherub is. There's cherubs, there's seraps, and other types of angels in heavenly hosts, and cherub are seen as the highest order. In fact, we see them in Ezekiel chapter 1, Ezekiel chapter 10, as being the ones that get to guard the very throne room of God. That's what these cherubs do. And so he lived in the presence of God until his first fall that we read about, somewhere in the first 128 years of creation. In fact, we then see him in the days of Job. We see him still able to come into the presence of God, but he no longer abides there. He no longer lives there. He still has access to the presence of God, but he no longer lives there because he's fallen to the earth. And so we know he still has access to heaven, but it's not his home. But then there are further falls, because by the time the tribulation comes around, we read in Revelation chapter 12, verse 9, that shows his second fall. Because at that point, he's actually cast out of heaven, not to be welcomed back into heaven again. He's cast to the earth, down to the earth, and it says how he knows he has just a little time left. So at that time, during the tribulation, where God says, you're not welcome here in heaven even to visit any longer, he knows his time is short on the earth, and that's his second fall. And then actually we see another one at the end of the tribulation. He takes a further descent from the earth, from heaven to the earth. That's bad enough. But then he goes from the earth to what? What happens to him at the end of the 7-year tribulation? He gets cast into the bottomless pit, into the abyss. That's even worse. Okay, now he's trapped there for 1,000 years. Oh, but don't worry, Satan, it gets worse, because when he gets out from there, his fourth and final fall is he gets out from there to deceive the nations for a short period of time again, and then he's going to be cast into the lake of fire forever and ever. And that is his fourth and final fall. You ever thought about that before? Satan actually fell 4 times altogether. That's his full descent. And so it's all pictured here. What a waste. What a waste of all of his ability, beauty, wisdom, all consumed upon self. I will be like the Most High. Whew. Man, what a shame. Now, we have a fourth one I want to do here. It finishes the chapter in these last verses, from chapter 20 through chapter 20, verse 20 through verse 26. It sort of switches gear again. It's going to actually mention Tyre's twin sister city, Sidon, right next door to them. Many cities, even in America, we still talk about them as twin cities, right? Minneapolis and St. Paul, you talk about them as twin cities. In Maine, where we were from, Bangor was a big hub, but Brewer was right next door. So we talked about Bangor, Brewer as the twin cities. Well, Tyre and Sidon were very much like that. And so we have a mention here about Sidon. But interesting enough, these few verses about Sidon aren't even really about Sidon. They're about Israel again. They're about Israel. And then we actually get a mention of Israel in verse 25 and verse 26. So our last note about pride here that I want to look at to wrap this up is this: that pride will make you unusable for the kingdom of God. Completely unusable. Notice how that comes out here, starting in verse 20. The word of Yahweh came to me, saying, Son of man, set your face against Sidon, and prophesy against her, and say, Thus saith Lord Yahweh, Behold, I am against you, O Sidon, and I will be glorified in your midst. Then they will know that I am Yahweh, when I execute judgments in her. And I will manifest my holiness in her, for I will send pestilence to her, the blood to her streets, and the wounded will fall in her midst, by the sword upon her on every side. Then they will know that I am Yahweh. And in verse 24, and there will be no more for the house of Israel there will be no more for the house of Israel a prickling briar or a painful thorn from any round about them who scorned them. Then they will know that I am the Lord Yahweh. So this judgment on Sidon, it's righteous, but it will cause God's holiness and God's glory to shine forth. And did you notice that all of this is done for the loving care of God's own people, Israel? That's why this is done. He's the apple of their eye, and he specifically says, this is why I'm doing this, so that they will no longer be a prickling briar for the house of Israel. They will no longer cause pain to my people, Israel. That's why God's doing this. This section against Sidon here is a good reminder of that's why all of these foreign nations are listed here, because of their interactions with Israel and the pain that they caused to God's chosen people. And that's why they're listed here. And Sidon is just put aside, and they will be gone completely for what they did to Israel. They've become completely useless. And now finally in verse 25, thus saith Lord Yahweh, when I gather the house of Israel from the peoples among whom they've been scattered, and I will manifest my holiness in them in the sight of the nations, then they will live in their land which I gave to my servant Jacob. They will live in it securely, and they will build houses and plant vineyards, and they will live securely when I execute judgments upon all who scorn them all around them. Then they will know that I am Yahweh, their God. God desires a people that are looking more and more like him in humility, more and more every day. That's what he's looking for. This is a great reminder that the judgment of the nations, it's not so much to eradicate these peoples, so much it is to refine a people into holiness for God. Refine people into his own image and into holiness. That's what it's all about. He desires holiness, and that's what he mentions here, even about Israel in the end. And so if you don't want to go through the fire to be refined into holiness, you'll go through the fire and be burned up and become completely useless for the Lord. That's the only options the scripture gives. In our flesh, we would be burned up by God's judgment. But if we become born again, have a new heart, now that can withstand the fire, and we'll come out on the other side. So challenge ourselves tonight. Have you noticed any signs of pride in our own lives, like we've seen here as epitomized? If we've seen these telltale signs of pride, we need to deal with it. Come to the Lord and tell him about it. Talk to him about it and deal with it. Get it behind us. And ask the Lord for the power of the Spirit to eradicate it and help us to live in a new way, not for the things of this earth, but for the things that would please him. So are any of these things true in our own lives? Have we become focused on maybe just things we're good at rather than things that God wants us to sink our teeth into? Think about it. Do we think that we're more than we actually are? Apart from ourselves, we're nothing. Apart from Christ, we're nothing. With ourselves only, we're nothing. Sometimes we find that pride has taken us farther than we're willing to go. Has that happened? That's pride. And then finally, have you become unusable for the kingdom? There is an easy way back. If these things have been noticed in your life, I just want to read you one psalm here to end this real quick. I'm going to just pull it out real quick. Psalm 10, verse 4. If you want to go there with me, you can. Psalm 10. It's a great way to end this section. Psalm 10 says, poor is he who... that is not the verse I wanted. I apologize. Let me just look around and see if it's right here. Oh, good. Hey. Sound booth helping me out. Yeah, that's exactly what I want. Psalm 10, verse 4. The wicked, in the haughtiness of his countenance, does not seek God. All his thoughts are, there is no God. See, that's the solution that I'm looking for. The easy way back to God is think about God. Turn our hearts and our attention back to God. And that's something the haughty, the prideful won't do. But if we can humble ourselves, come to the Lord in prayer, and just say, Lord, I need you. That's the way back. I think sometimes we think the way back is so hard and so long, and Lord, you don't know all the things I've done. And the Lord would just say, the way back is just seek me. Just seek me. Just every day come to me in prayer and say, Lord, I need you. Lord, rid me of this pride, and he will do it every time. Amen? Amen. Let's pray.